The world is in complete turmoil.
We're dealing with a lot of stuff, racism, poverty-stricken areas.
Broken families.
Sex trafficking.
It's so violent now.
Perversion. It takes everything out of God's divine order.
I became very depressed, and I was going to take my life. And I said, God, I give you one more chance. And I said, God, please show me that you care.
He went to back up a fellow officer, and a group of gang members fired upon them, and Dan was hit, and he died there.
I didn't understand, what about all those verses where it says, he will lift you up? So I was yelling out to God.
As an educator, my heart is for my students. There are rules or even constraints on what I'm able to share. It's difficult to weigh the balance of what's appropriate.
I kind of made fun of Christians. I thought they were shallow. I thought religion was a crutch that people used to get through life.
Life is pretty fragile. That in itself made me want to live more for Christ because I don't know how much I've got. I don't want to waste a day.
I got to a place in my faith that I had to be obedient to the Lord, and I was taking a huge risk of people condemning me in my business.
These are incredibly confusing times. It's as if we went to sleep and woke up in a completely different world. It leaves us, many of us, feeling confused, disoriented. We don't quite know how to respond to this place we find ourselves in. And yet, comes to the rescue a guy named Daniel and a book called Daniel. It was written to give instructions to adults who are living in a Babylon-like culture so we would know how to have an impact and how to have an influence. What was his secret? God is always in control of who's in control. He's never confused, he's never frustrated, he's never surprised, and therein lies the foundational cornerstone of Daniel's attitude, Daniel's action, Daniel's survival, and Daniel's thriving in Babylon.
Well, I first started looking at the issue of manhood when some men in my church approached me and basically said, we need to do something for the men. They were looking for something, honestly, a little deeper, a little rawer. And then I think there were a number of issues that guys wanted to talk about that they didn't feel like were addressed in church. That's what kind of spurred me to begin to research and explore at a deeper level what it really means to be a man. One of the great aha moments was that suddenly, as I looked at the Bible, two men just jumped out of the text. And interestingly, featured one at the very first part of the Old Testament and the other featured at the first part of the New Testament. That was a huge aha because I thought, well, if I took these two supreme kind of archetypes of masculinity, could I somehow come up with a definition of manhood that would be universal for all men? At least they could use it in a practical sense. As you take these two men and compare them together, there's some things that fall out the bottom that I think give us a very simple but compelling definition of masculinity. When you look at the first Adam, here he was placed in a garden, and he was asked, as any man, to take leadership of that and be aggressive in it. And yet, when the first threat came to that leadership in the garden from the serpent, rather than be a man, be active, he shrunk back in an infection that now infects all men, and that's passivity. But when we look at the second man who, without being sacrilegious, was in the comfort of heaven, as he looked at how sin was ravaging humanity, rather than being passive and just enjoying it as a spectator, he stepped up and actively did what real men do, and that is invade the issue. So one of the first things that I see as I compare these two men was one fell into passivity, the other rejected passivity.
Throughout history, the only question bigger than how are we here is why are we here? Does my life matter? Is my life going to have meaning?
The world wants to drown out your true purpose. The world wants to drown out the unchanging purpose of God. And what is the purpose of God? The purpose of God is God blesses His people to reach all peoples. What if we passed out a world map and someone just asked you to locate areas of the world where Jesus was not known? How would you do? The reality is we've studied God's Word, but we have not studied God's world. God has called us to see the world the way He sees it.
What if God was writing a story right now and wrote a part in his story just for you, but you missed it? Even a small part in a great story is a great honor.